Welcome to Kentucky Crossroads with Roger Ford. Here, you'll find lively discussion about the issues, unique communities, and fascinating people from across the Bluegrass State. Each week, we'll discuss our history and culture, as well as explore the unique places that make Kentucky so special. Now, join our host Roger Ford as we take a journey through the Bluegrass State and discover the stories that make us so unique.
Hello, and welcome to Kentucky Crossroads. I'm your host, Roger Ford. We're parting from our normal format today, and in place of a featured guest, I'm going to be discussing the pressing crisis that looms across the country, the crisis of infrastructure deterioration. I'll focus not only on the overall infrastructure crisis in America, but I'll also focus on the specific impacts to rural communities in Kentucky, especially Eastern Kentucky, where many communities are seeing a rapid decline of population of young people, working age adults, and others leaving the region to find work in other locations, educational opportunities in other locations. And that leaves us with a problem with our infrastructure in the rural areas of the state and the country that have been treated like the proverbial can kicked down the road. We are seeing cracks in the dam, as it were, and local governments are faced with a future lacking in a tax base to respond to the crisis. And in Kentucky, and especially in Eastern Kentucky, we'll discuss the lack of coal severance tax, as it were, and how that is impacting our current critical need to upgrade and improve our infrastructure. It's a crisis that affects every single one of us in our daily lives, from the roads that we drive on to the water we drink, to the public utilities and the internet and cable service that we require for home and work. And here in Eastern Kentucky, we're no exception, especially those of us in Eastern Kentucky who are going to face rather hard choices in the coming years as populations continue to age, industry shifts from coal-based jobs that pay a living wage to a low-wage service sector job that doesn't pay a living wage. And as we will discuss today, the clear point is the inability of local governments to address upgrades and improvements to the infrastructure, let alone managing a crisis of deteriorating infrastructure without proper tax base to be able to respond to it. In this podcast, we're going to explore this growing crisis of infrastructure deterioration. We're going to highlight some of the most recent events, not only in Kentucky, but elsewhere, including the recent train derailment in Ohio, while offering suggestions and insight as to how we might improve and go forward as a country and specifically as a state and a region within the state of Kentucky, and how we do that in a moment. Welcome back. As we begin our discussion today, it's important to note that the infrastructure crisis in the United States has been a long-standing issue, debated everywhere, from the halls of Congress to the floors of the state legislature, to the county courthouse and city hall, and even at the corner diner. The discussion of our infrastructure comes in many colors. It covers many facets of the discussion. Everybody has a solution, but inevitably, it leads to the same conclusion, that we have failed to properly maintain our infrastructure and have failed in many instances to upgrade and improve our vital infrastructure to meet the demands of the 21st century. In Kentucky, we can start with how tax money, specifically allocated for investment in infrastructure, among other defined economic development project opportunities, was wasted over the last 60 years. Of course, those in Eastern Kentucky will know that I am speaking to the severance tax, or commonly known as the coal severance tax. It includes not only the extraction of coal, but also natural gas and quarried rocks such as limestone. Spending on frivolous projects using this severance tax that was enacted by the state legislature in Kentucky to invest in coal producing areas for the day when fossil fuel production declined in the region. While community centers, athletic complexes, nonprofit programs, balanced budgets, all of these other spending activities can be shown as necessary benefit. the depletion of the coal severance tax on short-term, politically popular projects sacrificed long-term investment on necessary infrastructure and economic development projects for the most part. In Kentucky, we can't ignore the role of state government over the last 60 years in abetting the wasting of severance tax and siphoning large percentages of that tax and diverting it to non-coal counties on projects that benefited those cities and counties that never mined a lump of coal or drilled a single gas well. As we know, coal severance tax as a revenue stream was divided among the state government, county governments, and local governments in coal producing areas only after the state took a lion's share of that money and invested it in non-coal producing regions of the state. This is a contributor to the failure to invest in rural eastern Kentucky. See, it was easy money. It was plentiful money. We all can remember, if we're old enough, the coal booms and the bus cycles that have plagued eastern Kentucky all these years. And this money was plentiful, made on the backs of coal miners and taken from the companies and communities that needed to make investments in their future, that needed assistance in planning how this money would be invested. The depletion of the coal severance tax has had significant impact on local governments in eastern Kentucky, mainly since Obama's war on coal that began in 2009, limiting their ability to upgrade and improve infrastructure to attract new industry to the region and the plan for the day when coal was no longer plentiful. As coal mining has collapsed and forced a transition that was imposed from the Obama administration, local communities lost thousands and thousands of jobs. With a looming crisis and deterioration of critical infrastructure that is now beginning to fray at the edges and reveal itself as a growing crisis. We will highlight some of the specific impacts of declining coal severance tax and population's downward spiral in eastern Kentucky, and how that is having a negative impact on rural communities and in many ways the United States overall. We continue our discussion on the infrastructure crisis with a focus on rural Kentucky. What are some of the examples of the impact of depleted tax base and declining population, leading to underinvestment in infrastructure? Some specific failures related to this issue include reductions in funding for local projects, the decrease in local production, and a declining population in eastern Kentucky has resulted in a decline in the revenue generated from the coal severance tax and other taxes. This has led to a reduction in the amount of funding available for local projects, such as road improvements, water and sewer infrastructure upgrades, and economic development initiatives, coupled with a rate increase on vital services seemingly every year that are hitting those least able to afford it. Local governments are then forced to impose occupational net profit taxes, which in many ways discourage new industry from locating to a region. Delays in infrastructure upgrades. Local governments in eastern Kentucky have been forced to delay critical infrastructure upgrades due to the depletion of the coal severance tax and other economic factors. For example, the city of Pikeville was forced to delay a $10 million water treatment plant project due to lack of funding. This project is badly needed, as localized growth within the city as a result of people shifting residency from more remote areas of the county and the region to the city to be closer to medical services and the University of Pikeville. Overall, municipal water and sewer infrastructure are aging and are struggling to keep up with demand of an ever shrinking population in many rural areas, especially in eastern Kentucky. And as we've learned recently, the Mountain Water District in Pike County, Kentucky, which is the main water utility in the county, is planning to raise water rates and sewer rates for residents of the county. Mountain Water District has filed applications with the State Public Service Commission to raise rates. The proposals seek to increase water revenues by 25% on water and sewer receipts by 49%. For the average residential customer using 3,100 gallons of water per month, that proposed rate would mean that water bills would raise from 33.50 to 41.17, an increase of nearly 23%. All of this is a direct result of not only depleted coal severance tax, but also a result of a lost population. Underinvestment due to lack of coal severance tax, coupled with that, limits a local government's ability to match federal funding for such projects that would upgrade, and improve infrastructure. This leads us to an inability to attract new industry. Without the necessary infrastructure upgrades, many communities in eastern Kentucky are unable to attract new industry to the region. This has resulted in a lack of job opportunities and economic growth, which has further exacerbated the economic challenges faced by the region as young people graduating from high school leave the region to find educational opportunities and job opportunities in other places. This decreases the quality of life for residents. The lack of investment in infrastructure has had a negative impact on the quality of life for residents of eastern Kentucky. For example, many communities have outdated water and sewer systems that can lead to health and safety concerns. Additionally, poor road conditions make it difficult for residents to access essential services such as healthcare and education. Antiquated infrastructure and its accompanying issues lead many young people to leave the region for educational and job opportunities. These young people never return. This is what we call the brain drain. It's been going on for generations. The dual negative impact of depleted severance tax and population decline linked with neglected investment in vital infrastructure is leading to critical breakdowns in key infrastructures that are addressed with breakdown maintenance or incident maintenance, meaning repairs and equipment are only installed when a breakdown occurs. Then it's a real crisis. It's an immediate need, and an economic loss and a suffering occurs for the community and the residents in that community. And this is happening all over the country. With various critical infrastructures deteriorating due to aging and underinvestment, some of these critical infrastructures are showing great stress under the pressure of daily demand. These include crumbling roads, unsafe bridges, leaking water systems, derailments, brownouts, blackouts of the power grid, overworked airports, among others. The list goes on and on. We can all find these examples. This deterioration has resulted in significant environmental and economic damage, ranging from environmental catastrophic pollution to lost economic productivity. In America, deterioration of infrastructure is a problem that's not only going to get worse if we take action, it's going to affect us very sooner rather than much later. We need to invest in our communities, in our roads, in our water and sewer systems, and in our transportation networks, and in our power grid. We need to ensure that we have safe and reliable infrastructure for the next generation. And that starts with addressing the problems that we face today. So let's start the conversation. Let's find the solution. And in this segment, we'll turn our focus to potential solutions. Greater focus on private enterprise and investment to lead the way to solve the infrastructure crisis in America, and especially investment in rural communities. Let's examine some solutions to our infrastructure crisis. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, has proposed several solutions to the infrastructure crisis in the United States. One of the key recommendations from the Heritage Foundation is to increase private sector involvement in infrastructure development and maintenance Let's not make it just a solely government-led operation or a government-controlled operation. This would involve providing incentives for private investment in infrastructure projects, such as tax breaks and streamlined regulatory processes. Another solution proposed by the Heritage Foundation is to streamline the regulatory process for infrastructure projects in general. They argue that the current regulatory environment is overly burdensome and contributes to the high cost and slow pace of infrastructure development. They recommend prioritizing infrastructure projects based on their economic benefit and potential for job creation. This would involve conducting cost benefit analyses and focusing on resources for projects that are most likely to generate economic growth. Examples of this failure that have resulted in the economic and environmental damage include the collapse of I-35 West Bridge in 2007 in Minnesota. This killed 13 people and injured 145 others. We've all heard the stories of the Flint, Michigan water crisis, which began in 2014 and resulted in lead contamination of the city's water supply. This is an ongoing crisis. More recently, we've seen the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack in 2021 that disrupted the supply of gasoline and other fuels in the southeastern United States, which has led to long lines at gas stations and price increases. And of course, it goes without saying, the most recent example is the train derailment in Palestine, East Palestine, Ohio, that has resulted in a wide-ranging environmental and economic disaster that illustrates the point of potential for underinvestment in railway infrastructure. While other factors are yet to be revealed, including terrorist attack against a rail system, it can be pointed out that some of the factors are, at least in part, potential causes for the train derailment in Ohio. Aging infrastructure. Many rail lines, bridges, tunnels have been in use for decades and are in dire need of repair and upgrading. However, the cost of maintenance and repair is high, and the government has simply not invested enough to maintain the railroads in good condition. That leads us to another factor: insufficient funding. The government has not provided enough funding for the development and maintenance of railways, which has resulted in poor quality tracks, inadequate equipment, and inadequate safety systems. Another factor could be insufficient training and staffing. I know all industries, we've heard it, they are facing shortages in labor. The rail industry would be no different. They're understaffed and undertrained and overworked, leading to insufficient safety procedures and improper handling of equipment potentially. And then we come to the government's responsibility. In many ways, the government has overregulated the rail industry, which has made it very difficult for railroads to operate efficiently and economically. Inadequate safety systems. There has been some suggestion that the rail industry lacks adequate safety systems to prevent accidents, such as track defects, signaling systems, and automatic braking systems. There appears to be a lack of communication between rail companies and government agencies. In fact, it's been said it's poor, resulting in a lack of coordination and inability to quickly respond to emergencies. And then there is the lack of investment again in technology. The rail industry has not invested enough in modern technology, such as sensors, analytics, and artificial intelligence to prevent derailments and other accidents. All of these could be contributing factors. Extensive thought is being given to this issue by public policy think tanks. Several options proposed by think tanks to streamline the regulatory process as it relates to infrastructure upgrade and improvement. For example, again, the Heritage Foundation proposes that the government should establish a regulatory budget that caps the total cost of regulations on the private sector. This would force regulators to prioritize their regulations and ensure that the cost of compliance is not excessive. Couple that with a suggestion by the Prager University, a nonprofit think tank that suggests that the government should create a fast track approval process for infrastructure projects that meet certain criteria, such as those that provide significant economic benefit or that enhance our national security. The Cato Institute goes farther. It proposes that the government should eliminate unnecessary regulations that are not directly related to safety or environmental concerns. This frees up financial resources and other resources and reduces costs for both the business and the consumer. Included in this list of policy proposals is this one from the Brookings Institute, which suggests that the government should invest in better data collection and analysis to identify which regulations are most effective and which are unnecessary. The Brookings Institute is a more liberal think tank, and even they suggest streamlining the process. This would allow policymakers to make more informed decisions about which regulations to keep and which to eliminate. It's intriguing, the proposal from the American Enterprise Institute that suggests that the government could streamline the permitting process for infrastructure projects by consolidating various federal, state, and local permits into a single application process. This reduces the time and cost of obtaining permits and ensures that all necessary permits are obtained in a timely manner. Overall, these proposals aim to reduce the burden of regulation on businesses and individuals while ensuring that necessary environmental protections are in place. By streamlining the regulatory process, infrastructure upgrades and improvements can be achieved more efficiently and effectively. The infrastructure crisis in the United States is a multifaceted problem that requires a comprehensive approach to address it. Aside from the regulatory reforms to the process, we must move beyond paperwork and beyond incident maintenance and aim to be able to upgrade and resolve the infrastructure crisis. And to do so, we must look at how we financially manage without undue burden on taxpayers and governments. For starters, we need to increase funding through a diversified tax revenue base with attention from all levels of government. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that the United States needs to invest $4.5 trillion by 2025 to upgrade its infrastructure. Federal government can provide a significant portion of this funding through increased spending on infrastructure projects. Additionally, states can also increase their own spending on infrastructure to address their unique needs. However, in that, the government must look for ways to cut waste and mismanagement and offset infrastructure spending with curtailed spending elsewhere. That's right. We can't just keep adding to our debt and our deficit at the federal and state level. We must figure out how we offset spending and target investment into the infrastructure. Secondly, that requires us to develop a comprehensive long-term plan. The infrastructure crisis cannot be solved through ad hoc measures or quick fixes. That's where we're at today. It requires a long-term plan that is based on comprehensive data and analysis. A long-term plan can help prioritize projects, allocate resources, and ensure that infrastructure is built to last. Thirdly, we must embrace technology. In a technology-driven world where we all have a smartphone at our disposal, we must all recognize that technology can play a crucial role in solving the infrastructure crisis. For example, smart infrastructure, which uses sensors and real-time data, can help identify maintenance needs before they become significant issues. Additionally, self-healing infrastructure, which uses materials that can repair itself, can help reduce maintenance costs and extend the life of infrastructure once it's replaced. Also, we must prioritize resilience. The infrastructure crisis is exacerbated by the increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters. To address this, infrastructure needs to be designed to withstand extreme weather events and other natural disasters. This requires a focus on resilience, which involves designing infrastructure to be adaptable, flexible, and able to withstand a range of disruptions. Even more important, how do we achieve this? For one starting point, let's consider the P3 or public private partnership. Public private partnerships can be an effective way to address the infrastructure crisis. These partnerships can involve the collaboration between the government and the private sector to fund and implement specific infrastructure projects as part of a comprehensive plan. This approach can help leverage private sector resources and expertise while ensuring that infrastructure is built in the public interest. You couple that investment with sustainable infrastructure that can be designed to be more sustainable, which can help address the infrastructure crisis while reducing the impact on the environment. Sustainable infrastructure involves using materials that are environmentally friendly, that reduce energy consumption, and implement green infrastructure projects such as green roofs, rain gardens, and the use uh, of bio-based technologies that are emerging in industries like the hemp industry. Hemp is a very, very flexible material when it comes to sustainable building. Lastly, we must reform and upgrade our power infrastructure to meet demand, to increase resiliency and protect against potential external attack or cyber attack. One example would be to look at community solar, microgrid, and municipal utility solar projects that would be coupled with other economic development activities. Solar energy projects can positively impact rural communities in ways that we're just now beginning to understand. They create new jobs, they boost local economic activity, and in addition, they increase resiliency in rural areas, providing reliable energy sources that is less vulnerable to disruption, that can accommodate severe weather and other emergencies. And much like coal fired and natural gas power generation, solar farms in rural areas can also increase the local tax base on underdeveloped land, thereby generating vastly new amounts of tax revenue for local governments through increased property tax, lease payments, payroll taxes, net profit taxes, and other fees without great investment from local, state, or federal government agencies, while also maintaining a cheaper rate overall for each of the individual taxpayers. Renewable energy projects can bring economic benefit to rural areas by creating jobs, increasing local economic activity, generating new revenue streams. These are all benefits that in turn can lead to infrastructure improvements and greater resiliency for rural communities. So, as we conclude this episode of Kentucky Crossroads, I leave you with this thought. Investing more funds in infrastructure, both public and private, is crucial to avoiding an economic and environmental disaster in the United States, particularly in rural areas like Eastern Kentucky. Failing to do so risks not only the livelihoods of those who live in these areas, but also the health and well-being of our wider population. A telling example of this can be seen in the case of the Martin County water crisis here in Kentucky, where a lack of investment in infrastructure, poor planning, and misuse of tax revenue, or should I say, it continues to impact thousands of residents in Martin County because of the lack of preparation and foresight. It's therefore imperative that we avoid a crisis like the Martin County water crisis. It's imperative that we prioritize investment in infrastructure to prevent such disasters from occurring and to ensure a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone and look to innovative thinking, new ideas, new methods. And we look to the private sector, to entrepreneurs to solve these problems. Thank you for listening. I'm Roger Ford. And until next time, God bless you and your family. And God bless the United States of America.
You've been listening to Kentucky Crossroads with Roger Ford. Be sure to join us for our next weekly episode, where we'll discuss the issues, history, and culture that makes Kentucky such a unique place in our country. Kentucky Crossroads is broadcast on Southern Classic Radio each week and is available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.